Hi everyone. So my name's Iona Silverman. I'm a partner at Freeths. I'm in the intellectual property and media team. So we do a lot of work with trademarks, with copyright, branding, a lot of work in the advertising and marketing space. If you were in the last talk, you will have heard a bit of talk about green claims, and we're seeing a lot of that at the moment. But today I'm here to talk to you about working with influencers, which is something we do, and I tend to work mostly on the brand side, but occasionally on the influencer side. And this is quite a fun topic. It's always an interesting one. I thought we'd run through what happens if you get it wrong, because that's why we actually care about a lot of the things that we do. We want to know what happens if we get it wrong, what's the law, some top tips, talk a little bit about authenticity, talk a little bit about agreements with influencers, which is the slightly drier stuff, but from my perspective, probably the more interesting side of it. ASA complaints, influencer fraud, and virtual influencers. I'm conscious I've only got half an hour and I could probably talk about this all day. So I will try and rattle through it and leave some time for questions. But equally, if you'd like to jump in and ask a question as I go, please feel free, because we're quite a small group, and actually I want to make this interesting for you. So, if you've got things you'd like me to talk about, please shout. So, what is an influencer? I haven't put this slide up to patronise you. I think we all know what an influencer is. But the reason I've got it here is because I want you to have an open mind and think that it's not just, people on social media who are influencers. People that we might call brand ambassadors, who have larger scale contracts, who put content through into print as well as social media. They're also influencers in the eyes of the law. You might call them representatives, you might call them affiliates, you might call them partners. I sort of don't care what you call them. The point is the term influencer is really wide, and we'll talk a bit about how we define influencer, but don't have a narrow scope when you're thinking about this. So why should you care? The ASA has increased its focus on influencer marketing and trying to clamp down, making sure that it's transparent and that people know when a marketing is influencer marketing and it's not organic content. They've been clamping down for the last couple of years, and they have put a lot of influencers on notice. In fact, they've got a naughty page on their website where they name and shame people. And honestly, some brands won't care. And if that's you, then fine. But some brands really will care and don't want to be named and shamed or have their influencer being named and shamed. So the real risk here is a PR risk. There aren't fines associated with this type of thing, but there is definitely a PR risk associated with it. Having said there are no fines, I've just done one slide on the online safety bill. The online safety bill is due to come into force at some point. It is a bill that aims to combat bullying and harassment and horrible things happening online. It is much, much, much broader than advertising, but it does encompass advertising and in particular influencer content. Ofcom will have huge enforcement powers. They will be able to levy large fines. These fines are not going to be levied on brands or on influencers. These fines are going to be levied on the tech platforms, who up until now have largely not had much responsibility for what gets put on their platforms, and the government and regulators are coming to see that actually they do need to take some responsibility. So it's the tech platforms who will be subject to these kind of fines for getting it wrong. However, they're not going to like that, and they are going to push that enforcement down. So I think you can expect to see more of a clampdown from the platforms themselves on the way influencer content is regulated online. So what are the rules? The ASA say the rules are really clear, and I think they are clear. It must be obvious to consumers before they read, like, or otherwise interact with a social media post if what they're engaging with is advertising. I.e., if you're looking at something online, you need to be able to tell whether it's advertising or not. In most cases, the use of #ad or similar is the clearest way of communicating the commercial nature of media content. To break that down a little bit, the general rule is, if content is either paid for or controlled by a brand, then you should be using #ad. That's the general message. Now, payment obviously includes, I pay you £1,000 and you put 4 posts on Instagram. That is payment. Payment is also, I'll give you a year's worth of products and you post about some of those on Instagram. Payment is also, I've sent out 100 lip glosses to a lot of people who may or may not post something on Instagram. That still constitutes payment. Obviously, the broader the scope, the easier it is, the harder it is to enforce, and the easier it is to say, well, I didn't know whether they were going to post anything or not. I had no control over that. But ultimately, that kind of doesn't matter. Ultimately, you've given them something for free in the knowledge that they may or may not post about it on social media, and therefore the influencer should be using hashtag ad. It's on the influencer themselves to use hashtag ad, but it is ultimately the brand that will suffer the consequences if there's negative PR backlash. The other aspect is control. So, and by control, I mean, I could say as a brand to an influencer, you must say this, but it doesn't have to be that specific. It can be, these are my key messages. It can be, I have a right to veto what you put out there, but I'm never going to enforce that. As soon as you have a right to veto, you have a right to look at what they're going to post before they post it. Even if you never enforce it, that's control. So I think you have to look at it that as soon as you have an agreement with someone and or are sending them free product, then you are entering this space. So it is a pretty broad requirement to use hashtag ad. Now, a conversation I have with a lot of our clients is, where do you draw the line? Because everyone's pretty clear that, yes, you pay an influencer however much for however many posts. Yes, fine, they should use hashtag ad, but there's a lot of grey area. So we've talked a bit about gifted product. If you're sending a lot of gifts out and they're very small scale gifts, perhaps they are just gifts. Perhaps you don't intend for them to go all over social media, and you can, put your hand up and say that to the regulator if you were picked up on it. That said, by then, the damage is done, in the sense that if they've picked up on it and you've got that negative PR, it's too late already. I have a client who has a really nice card that they send out with all their free gifts, and they say, we really hope that you enjoy this free product. If you would like to post about it on social media, please tag us at this account and please put hashtag ad. That way they feel that even though they can't control what the influencer's done, they feel they've done their bit and they have tried to do the right thing. What if someone really loves your brand? Brands ask me this a lot. Obviously, if they really love your brand and organically post stuff, happy days. If you send them a freebie, or you enter into an agreement with them and you say, look, I give you this, I pay you this, and you do this many posts, and a year later they're still loving your brand and they're still posting about it and they're still tagging you, should they then be using hashtag ad? And I think that's a really grey area. I think there's an argument to say, yeah, they should, because they're still getting free product, or it was free originally, and therefore there is an influencer agreement there, and therefore it is advertising. But I think there's equally an argument to say, no, it was advertising, and that was for that particular period in time, but that relationship's over now, and they have chosen to do this organically. So again, I think it depends where your risk tolerance lies. I think most of our clients would say, look, at the end of the agreement, if they're still choosing to use our products, then that's on them, and great that they want to do that. We have some clients that ask about working with charities, because they say things like, well, look, we supply content to charities, we don't necessarily expect them to post anything on social media, but then because we supply them with free product, they are often pictured using our product on social media. So do they have to put hashtag ad then? I say to them, well, we all know you're supplying them with free product because you want the content. It's not out of the goodness of your heart. But I think there's context. So I think if it's a post that is premised around maybe a rescue scene, and this charity have gone and rescued someone, and the post is all around what good work the charity have been doing, and incidentally they happen to be wearing a product that is branded, I think you're probably going to get away with that. If, on the other hand, you have got a picture of 4 people lined up wearing the same branded gear that just says meet our team or something like that, I think you probably do need to be putting hashtag ad at that point. So I think a lot of it is about context. I often get asked, what about affiliate marketing? That is still payment. So definitely the ASA has been explicit on that. That is payment for the purpose of using hashtag ad. What about employee discounts? One of my clients said to me, but our employees get a discount, therefore technically we're sort of paying for paying for their branded product, and then they put it on their social media. And I was like, I mean, how many followers do your employees have? And they said, well, some of them do have a lot of followers. And I said, I think it's okay. Like, I think let's not get too caught up here. If obviously someone is an employee and they are also an influencer and they're wearing your stuff every day, then maybe let's think about it. But actually, generally speaking, I think that people would understand that they're an employee of that company, and that's probably all over the internet anyway, and they'd understand that they'd want to be wearing that product. I also get asked, is there a difference between print and digital? And I think that's an interesting question, because when you look at a magazine, you know that you flip through and you see the adverts that look like editorial, but then they say, this is a paid partnership at the top, and you can quite clearly see some product, or if you read it, you think that's interesting that person's promoting whatever. We all understand that's paid content. But if you look at the editorial where they have chosen a number of, say, beauty products that they've put on a page, those beauty products have been sent to the editor. The editor has not gone and scoured the streets for those. So in a sense, you know, the brands are sending free product out and are getting it into the magazine, and nowhere does it say #ad. And I think that's an interesting distinction, because people feel like, well, if that's allowed, why am I not allowed to do it online? Which is an absolutely fair question, but sadly the answer is the law is different. I suppose the law has evolved differently in print because it hasn't necessarily been an issue, but on social media it's just so pervasive that they've realised they need to do something about it. So although they may feel like the same thing, you don't need to put #ad in a magazine, whereas you do in on social media. Use the right hashtag. It's really easy. Use #ad, use #advert. Don't use #adgifted. I've seen a lot of that recently. People think, oh, I'm not allowed to use #gifted, but maybe if I use #adgifted, I'll get away with it. #adgifted doesn't mean anything. The ASA's sole requirement is that you are clear and you don't mislead people, and the word adgifted is inherently misleading because it doesn't mean anything. There's lots of other ones that were popular quite a few years ago, you know, #spur, #spawn, #af, #affiliate, you know, effusive, with thanks to, I'm so grateful for. The ASA doesn't care. Don't try and hide it in some blurb. You have to put #ad, #advert, and you have to make it visible. You have to put it at the beginning of your post. If you're doing a story, you have to put it in your post. It has to be visible. You have to be consistent. You can't say, oh, but everyone knows that they're our brand ambassador, and if you click into their bio, it says I'm the brand ambassador for this brand. No, sadly, brand ambassadors have to put it in every single post. A word on advertising rules more broadly, which I won't go into. We advise a lot on different types of advertising rules. Obviously, they all apply to influencer advertising as well. So as soon as you're doing one of these, and for you guys, you know, body image is a particularly relevant one, comply with all of that as well. So, you know, considering use of filters, considering use of enhancements in images and things like that, as well as getting things right when you're running promotions, doing comparative advertising, all of that. I thought I'd say a word on authenticity, because I think this is important when it comes to influencers. You want your influencers to be authentic. You want your influencers to say what they feel and think, because that is the point of an influencer. You want them to like your product, and you want that to come across as genuine. However, influencers are people, and people are inherently flawed at the end of the day. And you can't control what they say or do. And therefore it is a double-edged sword, and you really need to consider how much freedom you give your influencer, how much you want to give them, and you need to select them quite carefully. And I think Johnny Depp's a really good illustration of that. I used to talk about influencers a long time ago, and I used to say, oh, would you remember when Johnny Depp went into Australia with the dogs that weren't licensed with Amber Heard, and that kicked up some press, and that wasn't great for Dior. Well, he's done a lot worse for Dior since. Dior still have Johnny Depp as their brand ambassador. So seemingly they are either tied in by a contract or not totally turned off by having someone like him as their brand ambassador. But for a lot of brands, that might not be the case, and they might care very deeply what their brand ambassador does in their personal life that might reflect badly on their brand. So with that, I wanted to talk about the agreement, because I think that's where you have to try to control how the relationship with your influencer works. So I'd say be really, really clear. I don't think you can be too granular in an agreement of this kind. I think you can say, we want you to post this type of content, we want you to post it on these platforms, we want you to post it at this time on this day, we want you to tag it in this way, we want you to use these paid promotions, we want you to put hashtag ad. You can lay all of that out for them. Obviously, as I've just said, the more you tie them down, the less authentic and free they can be. But they can still be free with their own messaging. You're just tying them down to exactly when they're posting and what the theme of their posting is, because that can make a real difference. So, posting deliverables and timelines, creative content and captions to be sent to the brand for brand approval is completely normal. Use of handles and hashtags and, hashtag ad. Think about exclusivity. That will depend on how big your brand is and what your negotiating power is and how big the influencer is, but you could negotiate in the cosmetic sphere, for example, or in the UK, or preferably, in the UK and the cosmetic sphere, all different types of exclusivity you can have with a particular brand ambassador or influencer, because what you don't want is, next week them to be promoting your competitor's brand. And you can put all of that very clearly in the agreement. Consider your termination rights. How are you going to get out of this agreement if you want to? Can you terminate for breach? Can you terminate for material breach? What if they say something that, in your opinion, doesn't reflect well on the brand, but in their opinion does? How tightly can you tie them down there? Can you make them give an indemnity for breach? So if they breach, they indemnify you. Is that any good? Do they have enough money to pay an indemnity? It's worth putting in the agreement often because it acts as a deterrent, but bear in mind that often you're not going to see that money. So it's often preferable to suggest paying them in installments rather than paying them in one go. Keeps everybody motivated. Make sure that you're only paying out when you're going to see returns. Consider if any agency fees are included, and what the agent's role is in the contract and what they're going to do versus what the influencer is going to do. And also be really clear that the influencer is not an employee. If they are posting 4 posts for you, that's not a problem. But if actually over time they end up posting so much for you that actually that becomes their main purpose and they don't really get any money from anywhere else, and really that is their main job, then they might have surreptitiously become an employee and then have employee rights. So that's just worth keeping on top of. ASA complaints, what should you do? As I said, the ASA, it doesn't really have teeth. It's not going to fine you. No one's going to prison because an influencer forgot to put hashtag ad on an advert. But it's the negative PR. So you should take the ad down. That's the first step. And some of our clients, they say, look, by the time the ASA's got around to looking at this, my ad will have come and gone. And I say, fine. Like if that's what your level of risk tolerance is, then that is absolutely fine. The ASA might come and slap you on the wrists and say, don't put the ad back up again, and you'll say, okay, I won't. But it's just whether that's the kind of brand you are, or whether actually featuring on the ASA website's not for your brand and not the way you want to portray your brand. And brands feel really differently about that risk level. I wanted to say a quick word on influencer fraud. It's something that we're seeing increasingly. Influencers buying likes, using click farms, automated bots making comments, coerced engagement, which is where influencers enter into a sort of pod of people and they're all required to like and comment on each other's posts, which sounds great in the sense that means they've all got more likes and more comments, but it also comes across as quite disingenuous when someone who is totally outside your sphere writes a gushing review about your post. It just doesn't seem authentic. So it's something to be avoided, obviously, but it is quite difficult and you won't necessarily know whether that's something your influencer is engaging in. Obviously, do your homework. you can use technology to have a look at their growth curves in terms of followers. If they have suddenly a lot more followers, or suddenly their followers drop off, that could be an indication that they have bought some followers and that the platform has got wind of that and cut them back down again. You can also use technology to help you do that. I mean, you're not going to be able to do it just by looking. You can also scan their comments in terms of doing your homework. If some of their comments seem completely nonsensical, that's probably because a bot wrote them, not a human, or repeated comments. We've all seen that quite a lot. A word on fake sponsored content, that is the reverse, where we're seeing some people who like to pretend that they're influencers when they're not. So they'll say something like, oh, I bought this great coffee from at blah blah coffee shop, really loving the blah de blah de blah. So it seems like a really engineered message, and it looked like they're an influencer when in fact they're not, and they've just been to buy their coffee. But the reason they do that is because they want people to think that they are an influencer, and they want to be approached by a brand in order to get engagement with that brand. So just be cognizant of that as well. Just because someone appears to be an influencer does not mean that they are. So what can you do about it? You can do your homework, as I've said, and like I've said, you can use technology. You can take legal action. I don't think we've seen any in this country yet, but the two causes of action that I would think of are passing off and misrep. So those are the two things to think about. And finally, I wanted to say a word on virtual influencers because they're on the rise. That's when somebody is or your influencer is not a real person. They are created. They might have a photo that makes them look like a real person. They might have an image that's created digitally, so it's clear that it's a digital. But either way, it may or may not be clear to followers that they are actually virtual, and they're often run by a team. So, this person never needs to sleep. They never need to eat. They can do whatever they like. They never go on holiday, except when they're needed to be on holiday for influencing purposes. The thing I would say with that is use #ad. They're still an influencer. They'll still be bound by the same rules. And also consider, are you misleading your consumers? If it's really clear that they're a virtual influencer, and there are a lot of them, I think Barbie is virtual influencer number 2 in the world. We all know she's not real. No one's being misled. It's fine. But there are others who are more realistic and who are impersonating real people, and that can be misleading to consumers. So just think about where that line is and whether what you're doing is misleading to your consumers or not. And then just consider, at the end of the day, even though they're not a person, they are an influencer. Therefore, all of those rules that I've just talked about still apply to them. I think we've got 5 minutes for questions. If anyone has got any questions, I feel like I rattled through that quite quickly, but please do shout.
I can't remember the exact name, but I've written about in the kind of recent past these kind of cross-party committees. I've kind of aware of these cross-party committees regarding things like I think a lot of it's to do with tightening the legislation around injectables and stuff, but also a lot of what they're discussing is to do with things like filters and the use of that. And I mean, is this something we're going to see a definite tightening of in future, do you think?
Definitely, yeah. And we've already seen it. The ASA has clamped down on those kind of things. As soon as you're being misleading, they've got a reason to say that ad's not appropriate. But yes, I think injectables, I think filters, I think anything that makes something look different to how it might be in real life is not going to work. And they are definitely going to look to clamp down on it, yeah.
What happens when you're using an influencer that's known internationally, and that maybe you do something in one country, but then everyone in the UK can see it as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because obviously, in an ideal world, we'd all be adhering to every single law in every single country. That's not possible. But as soon as you have got influencer content out there, it is out there for every country. So I think there are two approaches there. I think one is, if you use the UK rules, they're a fairly high threshold, and they are going to work across a lot of different countries. Hashtag ad, hashtag advert are accepted in most countries, even non-English speaking ones. And the second thought is, generally speaking, the law, although it's not tested in the influencer field, but the general rule is about targeting. So if you're clearly targeting an audience in the UK or an audience in the US, then you'd be expected to adhere to those rules. And if you didn't adhere to, say, rules in Brazil, people might not care. If, however, you are clearly targeting a country, you're clearly targeting Brazil, then you will want to adhere to those rules, yeah.
I think I can see online a lot of gifted from celebrities. Obviously, it doesn't apply here, but everyone's just using that.
Yeah, they do use it. And the ASA has really clearly said, it's not okay, you have to use hashtag ad or hashtag advert, but it doesn't stop people necessarily. And there's nothing to stop you. You can put hashtag ad, hashtag gifted, hashtag whatever, but ultimately hashtag ad has to come first.